Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into the story of a nation right at the heart of the Balkans, North Macedonia. This is a place whose history was literally written by the rise and fall of massive empires, a country that had to fight for centuries just to carve out its own identity. So that really brings us to the big question for today, doesn't it? How does a nation even survive being passed around between Persians, Macedonians, Romans, Byzantines, and Ottomans, and still come out on the other side with its own unique identity? It's an incredible story of resilience, and we're going to trace that entire journey right from the very beginning. Okay, let's get into it by turning back the clock. And I mean way, way back. Before all the famous empires showed up, this land was a super strategic crossroads, home to ancient peoples who just happened to be living in the path of some of history's heaviest hitters. So, before this territory was part of the story most of us know, it was the land of the Paeonians. They were an ancient people living just north of that legendary kingdom of Macedon. And they weren't alone out there. Other tribes like the Illyrian Dardanian and the Enchilai also called this rugged landscape home. It was this amazing mosaic of cultures, sitting right on the doorstep of a rising superpower. What's so interesting here is how quickly a pattern gets established. First, the Persian Empire under Darius the Great just sweeps in. Then, the famous Philip II of Macedon absorbs the region, and his son, Alexander the Great, makes it part of his world-spanning empire. And finally, of course, the Romans arrive, conquer the whole area, and fold it into their larger province of Macedonia. It was this constant cycle of conquest, a prize for whoever was the biggest power in the neighborhood. All right, let's jump to the next era and see how this all builds. Because after Rome falls, the story doesn't really change. It just gets, a lot more complicated. For the next 1,000 years, this land would be a battleground for a whole new set of empires, all of them determined to control this vital piece of the Balkans. And we're talking about a full millennium of shifting rule. You had the Byzantines, who were the heirs to Rome, trying to hold on, but their control was constantly being challenged. New peoples, new powers, they all kept arriving, each one layering their own influence, their own culture, and their own religion onto the land. This timeline just perfectly illustrates the chaos, right? In the 6th century, the arrival of Slavic tribes completely changes the demographics. By the 10th century, the region is a political heart of the powerful First Bulgarian Empire. After that falls, the Byzantines and Serbs fight over it. The Serbian Tsar Stefan Dusan even made Skopje his capital. But this constant back and forth finally ends in the 14th century with a new power from the east, the Ottoman Turks. And they would end up ruling for the next 500 years. 5 centuries under one rule. That's a long, long time. And the Ottoman legacy was just profound. They called the region Rumeli, or Land of the Romans. And this is crucial. Their millet system basically allowed religious groups, like the Orthodox Christians, to manage their own affairs. This is so important because it effectively preserved a distinct religious and cultural identity that would become the seed for nationalism later on. Because of this, Orthodox traditions survived right alongside new Muslim populations, and cities like Skopje and Bitola just boomed as major trade hubs. But as the Ottoman Empire started to get weaker in the 19th century, a brand new force emerged: nationalism. This idea of belonging not to an empire, but to a nation. And this marks the beginning of a whole new struggle, not for territory between empires, but a struggle for the very soul of the land itself. And let me tell you, this question was explosive. With Ottoman power fading, neighboring Greece, Serbia, and Bulgaria all started laying historical claims to Macedonia and its people. But right in the middle of all these competing projects, a different idea started to take root: the idea of a distinct Macedonian nation, with its own language, its own culture, and its own destiny. This new idea found its champion in a secret society, the Internal Macedonian Revolutionary Organization, or IMRO. Founded back in the 1890s, its goal was clear and it was radical: win autonomy for Macedonia. And while its members were initially mostly Macedonian Bulgarians, its vision was for an independent territory for all its inhabitants, no matter their ethnicity or religion. Well, all that simmering revolutionary spirit finally just boiled over in the summer of 1903. This quote really captures the moment perfectly. The Ilinden Uprising, organized by IMRO, was this huge, desperate rebellion against Ottoman rule. It was the moment the struggle for an autonomous Macedonia went from secret meetings to open warfare. Militarily, the uprising was brutally crushed by the Ottomans, but in defeat, it achieved a totally different kind of victory. For 10 whole days, the rebels established the Kosovo Republic, which became this incredibly powerful symbol of self-rule. That memory, the heroism, it became the foundational story for the future Macedonian state. It was proof that its people were willing to fight and die for their own nation. So the end of Ottoman rule after the Balkan Wars, well, it didn't bring independence. Nope. Instead, the region was partitioned, and the largest part was absorbed into Serbia, and then later into the new kingdom of Yugoslavia. This kicked off a really complex 70-year relationship with a larger South Slavic state. And this slide just perfectly illustrates the two very different Yugoslavias they experienced. I mean, it's like night and day. In the pre-World War II kingdom, the policy was just total suppression. The government pushed for Serbianization, they forbade anyone from even using the name Macedonia, and they denied any distinct Macedonian identity. But after World War II, under Tito's Socialist Federation, everything changed. A complete 180. For the very first time, Macedonians were officially recognized as a separate nation with their own federal republic, their own flag, and their own language. And this period was absolutely transformative. The Macedonian language was officially codified and standardized in 1944, which just paved the way for a flourishing of literature and media. The state invested heavily in industry, building massive steel, chemical, and textile plants to modernize the economy. And get this, when a devastating earthquake destroyed much of Skopje in 1963, a massive international effort rebuilt the capital, which came to symbolize both solidarity and this new forward-looking modern identity. Of course, as Yugoslavia began to crumble in the late 1980s, the Socialist Republic of Macedonia faced a massive choice. Do we stay within a failing federation, or do we take a huge leap of faith and forge our own path as a fully independent nation? And the people's will was, well, just look at that number. Crystal clear. In a referendum on September 8, 1991, an overwhelming 95% of voters chose independence. You just don't see numbers like that. It was an absolutely decisive moment. After centuries of being ruled by someone else, they had finally voted to become masters of their own destiny. But independence wasn't easy. Not at all. While the secession from Yugoslavia was remarkably peaceful, which was a rare exception in that violent breakup, new challenges popped up immediately. Right out of the gate, Greece imposed a crippling economic embargo over the use of the name Macedonia. And internally, tensions with the country's large ethnic Albanian minority grew, eventually exploding into an armed conflict in 2001 that really threatened the new state's stability. But the new nation managed to navigate these massive crises with smart diplomacy. Step 1. The 2001 Ohrid Agreement ended the internal conflict by granting greater rights and representation to the Albanian minority. Step 2. In 2018, the historic Prespa Agreement with Greece finally resolved that decades-long name dispute, changing the country's name to the Republic of North Macedonia. And that brave compromise unlocked the final step. In 2020, North Macedonia proudly became the 30th member of NATO, securing its sovereignty and its place in the world. Which brings us right up to today. Having finally secured its name and its borders, the nation is looking to the future. The path to European Union membership is the next huge goal, even though it's facing some new hurdles. After a history defined by empires, the next chapter for North Macedonia is all about defining its role as a stable, multicultural democracy in the heart of a changing Europe. The struggle for identity continues, but now it's finally on its own terms.